Hi, thanks for joining us for this live streaming continuing coverage of prepping for the monsoon. I'm Ted Ferrando. We're on LasVegasNow.com as well as the 8 News Now Facebook page. And before we get to our guests, we want to encourage you to join us with any questions or comments you might have. We're monitoring our Facebook page, so please let us hear from you. Let's get right to the guest. Todd Laricos, you can ask us questions here. Todd Laricos, the meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service. Thanks for talking with us about the monsoon and, of course, monsoon season. We want to talk a little bit about the monsoon itself and how it occurs. And I put up a graphic here because a lot of people don't realize that the monsoon there has to be several factors in order for it to be placed. And one of it has to be that high. That tends to come back westward, and it sits up right in the right spot, right?
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, that position of that high is absolutely critical, right? Because the monsoon is actually a seasonal shift in the wind pattern.
Yes.
And for us, that means a switch from a more westerly to a more southerly that brings in the moisture and allows us to be able to form those thunderstorms.
Yeah.
And so with that high off to the east, then we get that southerly flow, which you talk about a lot in your newscasts. And it gets us that added moisture.
What's is important about people, they don't realize this, is with an area of low pressure, you tend to what we call a counterclockwise flow, right? With high pressure, you get this clockwise flow. See how it's going like this? So you can see the flow pull up that moisture from the south and direct it right towards us.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And a lot of times in a monsoon, where the difference between an actual normal monsoon day and an active monsoon day, usually you get that lower level moisture from the south with that southerly flow around the high, but you can also get mid-level and high-level moisture stream in from the Gulf of Mexico, even with tropical waves, and add to that moisture in the atmosphere and then wind up having stronger storms.
That's a very good point. Okay, so not only are you pulling up moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, but over here is the Gulf of California, all right? And then you have moisture that can be pulled up there as well, correct?
That's right. Yeah. The bad days are the ones where those two intersect. We don't always have both components.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean we don't necessarily get thunderstorms. We definitely do.
Yeah.
But with the two components together, that's usually a bad day.
And one other thing we want to pinpoint out, too, is you can also have a trough, that comes in from the west, gives us that flow too and pulls all that up as well. So there's a couple of factors there.
That's correct. We can also get that type of setup. We can also get recurvature from tropical systems. We see that a lot too as well.
And that was my next thing I was going to bring up. This is why you and I are clicking on the same level. This is why he's with us right now. Is one thing people have to also have to realize too is some of that energy can be fed from actual tropical storms. And people are thinking, what? We are so far from the ocean. How is that possible? But it is possible, right?
It is. We're not far enough. And we won't get the tropical systems like, say, Florida does.
Yes.
They lose a lot of moisture coming into our area by going over the mountains, but we do get enough that, it gets that injection of moisture into the atmosphere, enough for us. We have so much heat over the desert Southwest in the summer. That gets the upward motion going. You add moisture to that, and flooding is the result. And
of course you see some video here. Todd, you can see this video here too of some of the flooding we've had in the past. Given that video you've seen there, how much rain does it take to actually produce that much flooding you'd see right there?
Not a lot. It depends on the terrain, how steep the terrain is, and whether or not you're over concrete or actual desert areas. But typically 1 inch of rainfall rates is typically what we like to see before we start the impacts begin. Anything over 1 inch, we're talking a lot about July 8th and the anniversary of that today. Yeah. That was upwards of 2 or 3 inches worth of water, and look what that did, right?
Yeah, and also we want to make everybody know that the Clark County Flood Control District, we love those guys there. They've done an incredible job saving the community, saving us from flooding. But even with that infrastructure in place, and they've done a phenomenal job, we're still going to get some flooding. I mean, if you get a good amount of rain, it's still going to flood.
Yeah, that's right. The flood control measures we put into place in Las Vegas are fantastic. They're not done yet. They've got about another 10 to 20 years yet of work to do. But it's having an enormous impact on mitigating those floods. Nonetheless, the threat is still there. We still have to stay vigilant during these storms. Nice, I'm getting tongue-tied.
No, wait, just so you know, Todd has started since this morning and has been doing numerous interviews with all the media, so I can understand how tired you are. Please sound off on your questions. I'm answering them here on Facebook. Todd and I are here for you guys. Nikki Monaco says, where's the thunder and lightning at right now? Well, the problem is the moisture just isn't right. Isn't there? The dynamics aren't right?
Yeah, we were talking about this during the newscast. We just haven't seen that seasonal shift of the winds to the south that really brings in that moisture content. Our winds are still staying out of the southwest to west. It's just a late onset. You know, our average start for the monsoon is about July 12th.
Yeah.
So we're not too crazy late, with the season at this point. But we are getting a little late for that start. There is some glimmer on the horizon there that we might actually start to see some activity here later in the week.
Melissa Nelson says, bring on the monsoons. I know a lot of people are waiting for that. Of course, being new to the Vegas area, it's nice to know all of this. Gary Rose says we have a lot of people that are actually new. I'd say a good chunk of my neighborhood are people that have been here a while, and half of them are people that have moved here and didn't even know what the monsoon was. So it's good that we go on here and we inform these people about all this too.
Yeah, it is. And I think people that move from the east or from other parts of the country or other parts of the world really don't understand, how resistant our soils are to absorption of water and how fast that water can run off. You can really get into trouble quickly around here.
Yeah.
And so if you're new to the area, you see those flooded roadways, and even if you've been here a while, turn around and don't drown. Don't take the chance.
And that's one thing to point out. Okay, you're from Florida, I'm from Washington State. So here's the difference between the two, okay? And compared to here. Now, Florida and Washington have soil, okay? They have soil. They soak in all that rain. You could still have some flooding, obviously, but they soak in a lot of rain. We don't have soil. A lot of it is desert rock. We don't know what happens to water on rock. Right, it has to find an outlet, right?
That's right, yeah. The fancy scientific term for that is hydrophobic, which means that the ground is actually very resistant to any water penetrating down in there, and it just runs off like it's concrete.
Right, and that's why flash flooding is also a big issue, and we were talking about this too. The #1 weather fatality in the world, of course, is heat, believe it or not.
It is.
But not far, #2, obviously, not far behind is flooding. Flooding is the #1 fatality, not tornadoes, not hurricanes, right?
Yeah, it's amazing when you think about it.
Yeah.
It's just not intuitive sometimes that heat and flooding are two of the major killers as far as weather is concerned. It's also the two that we have out here in abundance.
Yeah. Right, and obviously we have fatalities from those. And one thing about the flooding too is you have a hurricane, and once that hurricane dies out, turns into a carcass, it's going to create some flooding. So obviously it had some issues as it hit, but then afterwards you have to deal with the flooding, and that's not just for Florida or the Southeast. It sends that stuff all the way up to the Ohio Valley, all those other areas too. Okay, so anybody else any questions? We have Todd, you're popular. We got a lot of questions here.
That's great.
This is great. Okay, so we want to talk a little bit more what I have here. Okay, so monsoon 2019, what's the outlook so far for that? We always come up with a pretty good outlook of what we anticipate, what we expect. The El Nino has a good part of that too. What's our outlook for this year?
Well, we already talked about the little bit of the delayed start. So we've already got that in play. Looking forward for the rest of the monsoon, once it actually does kick in, we're actually looking at towards an average year. But as we discussed before, even with an average year, we're going to see a few events in there over the valley and in the area that are going to be highly impactful. So it's kind of deceiving to say, hey, you're going to have kind of a down year, average year, above year.
Right.
Those events are going to come. What we're really talking about here is the frequency or the recurrence interval of these bigger days.
Right.
So expect an average season, but be ready for those days that are really active.
All it takes is one.
That's right.
You take one day with just the right amount of moisture in place, an early start, maybe as early as noon, and then it's a bad day. Then you had a pretty good monsoon. And then there might be a couple days following that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and you made a good point about time of day. If you remember the July 8th, the anniversary we're celebrating
20
today,
years ago,
20 years ago today, that event started in the valley about 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. It did?
I did not know that. It started that early. You had that much energy and to spark up at 9 a.m.?
That's a bit unusual. Usually we tend to see that activity more towards the afternoon, but you can get those morning storms like that, and those are the ones because people aren't expecting it. We tend to think about thunderstorms in the afternoon, not necessarily in the morning.
Now, this is kind of early in July for this to happen, but was that fed by any tropical systems at all? Because I could see that happening at 9 a.m. with a tropical system, or was it just random starting at that time?
Not that one. It could be tropical affected, or a system that early could be tropical affected, because we have seen tropical storms already in the Pacific. But that particular day, we just got a very decent infusion of moisture from the south, more heavy than we normally do. And it just set the stage for all of that activity.
Yeah, that video,
you
can see the video right there. Of course, that had to be 1999, because I'm looking at that car right now. That definitely wasn't a car that was back in the 2000s. I arrived in 2004. They hired me here because of that 2003 storm system in my background with flooding. So, of course, I saw that and going, wow. You guys really get that stuff here. Okay, so our next question here is flooding and feet of water. A very important note is that, okay, you take a ruler, okay? You take a ruler that shows 12 inches, okay? 12 inches can actually knock you off your feet. 12 inches of moving water, correct? That ruler.
Yes. You know, I guess the best thing to kind of, for those folks that have been in a wave pool, you know, you're standing in waist deep water and how it's pushing you around. Water has a lot of force behind it.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
And it doesn't take much, you know, and it takes just 6 inches, 3 to 6 inches to float a vehicle.
Yeah, that's correct.
And if you're over a foot, you're moving that vehicle, you're floating the vehicle at that point, and pretty much in a life-threatening situation.
That's true. And in fact, I was told, like, obviously with a foot of water, that can already pick up a car. You throw moving water, which you tend to get with these flash floods, and of course that's going to pick up and move the car once you get to 2-3 feet, which is obviously happens out here too, in most places too. All right, we have a question here. It was from Carlos Salazar. Guys, what areas are prone to flash flooding, would you say?
Carlos, pretty much the entire desert Southwest is prone to it. There really isn't one area that's safe in our immediate area. You know, you're a bit more susceptible in areas where you're outside of flood-controlled areas, you know, where there isn't channels, or if you live near or downstream of a hill where you might get that runoff.
Okay,
you know.
Good. All right, one other final question here. Of course, the difference in monsoons, of course. We heard about the Southeast Asia or the Asia monsoon and our monsoon. What's the difference, and is there one that's worse than the other?
There isn't one that's worse than the other. Again, the monsoon is just a seasonal change in the wind pattern. That also happens over in India. It's called the Southwest monsoon, which sometimes creates a little bit of confusion. Our monsoon's called the North American monsoon. One isn't any more severe than the other. The minor difference is that the one in India is more tropical in nature. We have more of a desert environment, so it's harder for us to utilize all that moisture and get it out of the atmosphere into flooding. But essentially, they're the same phenomenon.
All right. Todd Laricos with the National Weather Service. Thank you so much, brother.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you coming in.
Anytime.
Of course, this last one, the tropical systems and the monsoon, I'll be talking about that at 9 o'clock for my Facebook Live. Todd will be sleeping because he's been up since this morning. I'll talk about that. Shakayla Alvarenga has more on the Nelson's Landing flooding. You remember that one? She'll have more on that, talk to some people there. And, of course, we'll talk more on the El Nino and how that's going to affect us this year with tropical systems and the monsoon. That's coming up on Facebook Live at 9 o'clock. And, of course, we'll see you also at 8 News Now at 11. Meantime, guys, have a great night. Thank you so much for joining us for Prepping for the Monsoon. The coverage continues all the way to 11 o'clock tonight. Have a great night. And be sure to share this with your friends.